for DC at-large council races, hosted by the DC Office of Campaign Finance. I'm Bennett Narapil, a DC politics reporter for the Washington Post, and I'll be the moderator for tonight's debate. Tonight, we will hear from 6 of the 23 candidates competing for 2 seats available on the DC Council. All candidates have been invited to participate, although some have declined. We encourage members of the public to submit questions via the website 2020dcdebates.com or participate online using the hashtag DCision20. Before we get started, let's hear from the head of the Office of Campaign Finance, Cecily Collier Montgomery.
Good evening. Welcome to the first inaugural 2020 DC debates for the at-large member of the State Board of Education and at-large member of the Council of the District of Columbia races. I am Cecily Montgomery, Director of the Office of Campaign Finance. The 2020 DC debates are the inaugural debates under the Fair Elections Program. Started in 2018, the FEP is a voluntary public financing program operated by the Office of Campaign Finance to support candidates for local political office in the District of Columbia. All FEP-supported candidates are required to take part in the debates. It is our hope that these debates, conducted in partnership with Washington Post reporters and moderators Perry Stein and Bennett Narapil, will help the public to learn more about the candidates, their positions, and policy platforms. We want to take a moment to thank our community partner organizations and the candidates for participating in this process. Thank you for joining us in our mission to help inform DC voters about the Fair Elections Program candidates and their positions. To learn more about the Office of Campaign Finance or the 2020 DC debates, please visit 2020dcdebates.com. The debates will remain on the website through Election Day, November the 3rd, for those who could not watch or listen live. Thank you for your support, and with that, let's meet our candidates.
Here are tonight's candidates. Chandra Jayaraman, a Capitol Hill area ANC commissioner. Alexander Padro, an ANC commissioner in Shaw. Maria Pickering, the Republican Party nominee. Robert White, the Democratic incumbent running for a second term. Ann Wilcox, the Statehood Green Party nominee. The ground rules for tonight's debate are as follows. Candidates will have 1 minute to make an opening statement, 30 seconds to answer direct questions, 15 seconds for rebuttal, and each candidate will also have 1 minute for closing statements. I'll also ask the candidates to remember that we want to have a productive discussion tonight without interruptions or crosstalk. I will be happy to facilitate discussion, so if you want to respond to a candidate, just raise your hand and I will be able to see you. And with that, we will move to opening statements. The order of statements and answers have been pre-selected randomly. Ann Wilcox, you're first.
Oh, thank you very much, Bennett. I'm glad to be here, and hello to my fellow candidates. My name is Ann Wilcox. I'm running for the Statehood Green spot in the at-large race for the DC City Council. I am a lawyer. I came to Washington in the 1980s and joined the DC Statehood Party at that time. I then became the Statehood Green Party. I went to American University, Washington College of Law. I've also been on the Commission for Women, appointed by Sharon Pratt Kelly, and was elected to the Ward 2 seat on the Board of Education from 94 to 98. That was the last fully elected Board of Education in DC. I'm representing the Statehood Green Party, which is a broadly progressive party. We support issues such as affordable housing, public education, and health equity, and I hope to get a chance to talk about those issues tonight. Thank you.
Next is Alexander Padra.
Good evening. I've been serving the Shaw neighborhood for the past 20 years as an advisory neighborhood commissioner and as executive director of Shaw Main Street for the past 17 years. In that time, I've helped to create thousands of units of new, affordable, and market housing, attracted over 400 new, mostly independent small businesses, helped to create new amenities in the neighborhood, put a new recreation center, a new library, parks, and in general transform a neighborhood that was a source of light for decades to one of the attractive places to live, work, shop, play, pray, and learn in the District of Columbia. My mission is to help to bring the kind of revitalization that I was able to show to all neighborhoods in the city without the kinds of displacement that normally is associated with that type of renaissance. So I'm looking forward to the opportunity of joining the council and bringing my years of experience to bear. Slogan is dreams come true, because I want to help to make all DC neighborhoods dream come true. Also become the first
Thank you.
Latino and the next gay member of the
Thank you.
council.
That's time. Maria Pickering, your opening statement.
Thank you very much. Good evening. I'm Maria Pickering. I'm a longtime resident of Washington, D.C. I've lived here most of my adult life. I'm an immigrant and a refugee, a mother. I've raised my child here in this wonderful city, and I'm running because I think it's time to bring true diversity of opinion and prudent management to the city council. My campaign motto is no more business as usual. I think residents in all 8 wards are tired of the corrupt practices and the mismanagement that has given us woefully underperforming public schools and homeless people sleeping in the streets in the midst of a pandemic. I'd like to say I'm one of the few candidates who is not participating in the so-called fair elections program, because I see nothing fair about taking taxpayer money for a candidate's campaign while we have homeless people sleeping in the streets during a public health emergency. I think we can work to make the city a better place. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Chandra Jayaraman.
Thank you very much. I'm Chandra J. Raman, a true independent. I'm running because I think we can do so much better for our families and for our community as a whole. We're in the midst of a pandemic that requires a council member who has the right expertise, the right experience, and a track record of producing results. And that's me. I have 18 years of emergency planning experience. I helped work on the pandemic plan and currently helping child care centers to reopen. So I know what it should look like when it's time to reopen our schools or dispense vaccines to our at-risk individuals across the city. I'm also an ANC commissioner for the past 8 years. I've been working with our small businesses to help them figure out how to survive through the winter and into the spring. Because I know they're the lifeblood of our community, and they're the ones that make DC a great place to live. But I also know we're at a critical crossroads. That's why I was the first one ever to bring together ANC commissioners from across this district with the deputy chief of police, the deputy mayor for public safety, 2 council members, including Councilmember Robert White, and NAACP, to talk about policing and then reimagine what it should look like if we're a national leader in public safety. These are things families tell me are important to them. These are the priorities I will take to the city council as your next council member. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Robert White.
Good evening, and thank you for having me. I'm at-large council member Robert White. I'm a husband, a father, a native Washingtonian, and I'm the Democratic nominee in this race. I'm a lawyer. I cut my teeth as a young lawyer on Capitol Hill, working for Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton, before I decided to leave that job and run for a local office, because I saw too many folks like my family who were not doing any better in the good times here in DC than we were doing in the tough times in the 90s, in the early 2000s. I have been a strong voice for the people on the council. I have written and passed some of the most progressive early childhood education legislation in the country. I just recently passed nationally recognized legislation to re-enfranchise our incarcerated felons, understanding the history of disenfranchisement of people of color. I have really tried to be a strong voice for the everyday people of this city who need someone who is not shy about standing up for them, somebody who is fighting for the people of this city every single day and never forgetting who elected me and why you elected me. And so I'm asking for your vote between now and November 3rd so I can continue to serve as your council member.
We will now move to the first question of the evening. There are 13 members on the DC Council, each bringing different life experiences and perspectives. What perspective is missing on the council that you would bring? You have 30 seconds to answer, starting with Alexander Padro.
I would Be the first Latino ever elected to the DC Council, and I would be the first GLBTQ member of the council in many years. I'm also an economic development professional, so I will be bringing that expertise to bear on the council.
Next up is Robert White. You are one of the 13 members of the council. What's a perspective that you've been bringing to the council that was missing?
When I ran 4 years ago, I told people I would be a bridge. And the reason I've been a bridge is because I'm a fifth generation Washingtonian who comes from a family that has struggled in this city. But I am a lawyer. My wife is a lawyer. We have a young family. And so we understand the struggles of families who are trying to raise their kids in this city. I also bring experience working in federal, local government, and all three branches of government. As an attorney, I bring a vast knowledge of how government works and how to make it work for our residents.
Maria Pickering, you mentioned in your opening statement the importance of ideological diversity. What's the missing perspective you would bring?
Well, the missing perspective I would bring is my experience as an immigrant and a refugee who was raised in poverty and who knows firsthand the importance of an education to a successful life. I think that we really need to do something about our woefully underperforming public schools. I also have had the opportunity as an immigrant to work at a variety of jobs, including being a waitress, a nurse's aide. I've worked in factories, so I understand what people on the other side of the table, what their life is like. I also have been a small business owner and a contractor in the government contract management space. So I bring that experience. I think I'm the best qualified
Thank you.
candidate to provide
Thank you. That's
oversight,
time.
the oversight role of the council. Thank you.
Ann Wilcox, what missing perspective do you bring to the council?
Right. Well, thank you. I think we need to restore the vote of the Statehood Green Party and the voice of the Statehood Green Party on the council. We did have two historic council members, Hilda Mason and Julius Hobson, before her. And the Statehood Green Party has a bottom line progressive position. For example, we would not develop McMillan Park. That should be a green space, which is historic. We would also call for restoring the functions of the public school board. So those are the kinds of bottom line progressive positions that I would bring to the council. And I'm a lawyer as well.
Thank you. Mr. Jayaraman.
Thank you for that question. I think I'm the right person at the right moment. I have 18 years of emergency planning experience, so I know what a successful city should look like as it reopens. I'm also a small business owner who's been impacted by COVID-19, like so many businesses across the city. So I know their struggles, and I know what we need to do to help them reopen and survive. I've actually also bring direct field experience, meaning I've worked with inner city kids at the Latin American Youth Center to help them find new pathways to a career. And that's what we need to do. And that's the kind of perspective we really need on the city council, direct experience. And I'm the right person at the right moment with my experience and my leadership skills on the ANC.
Let's move to the next question. After the resignation of Jack Evans earlier this year, Council Chairman Phil Mendelson said that voters should be concerned that the council is becoming less moderate and too quick to spend money. What's your response to his assessment? You have 30 seconds, starting with Ann Wilcox.
Yes, thank you. I think Phil's concerns are kind of overstated. For one thing, there are protections against overspending. We have to have a balanced budget. There are restrictions on certain rainy day funds and so forth. I would bring a progressive approach to the budget. The Fair Budget Coalition and other groups put out a lot of information about how the budget should be handled. We would also reverse Trump tax cuts and raise revenue that way. So no one is looking to fund pie in the sky projects. We're looking to fund human services, the homeless, healthcare, affordable housing, and other necessary needs of our city. Thank you.
Maria Pickering, is the council becoming too liberal?
Well, I think the facts speak for themselves, and look at the results. We have homeless people sleeping in the streets in the midst of a pandemic. If we truly cared about these individuals, these should have been the first individuals to have been taken care of when this public health emergency broke out in March. Look at our woefully underperforming public schools. Only 23% of our 8th graders can do math and read at grade level. We have a 62% high school graduation rate. Is this something we're proud of? This
Thank
is
you. That's
testament
time.
to the incompetence of 50 years
Thank
of a
you. We must
corrupt
move on.
monopoly.
That was
Thank
your
you.
time. Chandra J. Raman, do you agree with Chairman Mendelson that voters should be concerned about the council becoming less moderate?
Let's take a bigger picture into this race. 19 out of the 24 candidates switched parties to run as independents. And two of them, Ed Lazier and Marcus Goodwin, were Democrats 2 years ago, and they were flatly rejected by the voters. What it really tells me is that the city residents want a new way of thinking. And that's the kind of vision that I bring. And that's the thing that we need on the city council. Not a change in letters, but a change in vision.
Robert White, what do you make of Phil Mendelson's assessment of the direction of the council?
The council is elected democratically, and so the people brought in the council members, and when they don't like the work of those council members, they will take them out. Our job is to follow what the people want and what they need. For my part, when our economy was working very well before we entered into this public health pandemic, I voted against many tax increases because our tax system was working, but we were not spending it in a wise and equitable way. Since the pandemic, I realized that those who are at the bottom of our economic scale are going to need help, are going to need more of a safety net. So recently, I voted for slight tax increases. And so
Thank
I
you.
bring a balance to the
That's time.
council.
Alexandra Padro, what's your answer to the question?
I agree with the chairman, and I am a moderate. I don't believe that in a time of financial crisis as we are currently experiencing is the right time to start raising taxes. It's tantamount to killing the goose that laid the golden egg. Our small businesses are struggling to survive. We've been raising commercial property taxes 7 years in a row. Those burdens, has to be, addressed so that we have from commercial property tax and sales taxes to rely on in the future.
Staying on the subject of city finances, the DC Chief Financial Officer today announced a shortfall of more than $200 million for the fiscal year beginning tomorrow. I'm going to ask two questions related to this shortfall regarding spending and taxation. First, what, if any, areas in city government would you target for spending cuts? You have 30 seconds, starting with Alexandra Padra.
I'd look at programs and projects that are not moving very quickly and that have huge budgets associated with them. For example, the rollout or the expansion of the streetcar system, and also the development subsidies for McMillan Reservoir. That's a project that should be completely reconsidered.
Ann Wilcox, do you see any areas in the city government for spending cuts?
Well, I agree that vanity projects should be eliminated. This includes all developer subsidies, for example, where we don't get the return on those subsidies. I would also cut the streetcar funding, also McMillan Park. They wanted to move ahead to develop McMillan with capital funds, and those funds could be better used over the next few years. We don't need more high-priced housing at McMillan Park. So those types of projects should be cut.
Robert White, you mentioned earlier today the council doesn't always spend money wisely. What's an area where the council can cut spending?
I fought hard to cut the spending in our most recent budget for the streetcar, which simply has not panned out the way that the city had hoped years ago, and to put that money toward public housing repairs. That's a way that we can spend smarter. I also think that during the pandemic, with so much telework, we are able to take a look at our spending on utilities and agencies. I don't think that our spending is going to meet what we budgeted, and so we can redirect that funding elsewhere.
Maria Pickering?
Well, thank you for that question. One of the first places we can cut spending is get rid of this fair elections giveaway. Obviously, the streetcar to nowhere. And I think every city agency, given this prognosis of lower revenues, should do a zero-based budgeting drill and see what their real requirements are to perform their mission, starting at a zero budget baseline. And we can also cut the salaries. I take a 20% cut in the salaries of city council members, the mayor, and some of her highly paid staff who actually make more money than the average congressman. So there's plenty of opportunity for prudent fiscal management. Thank you.
Chandra J. Raman, what areas do you see as ripe for cuts?
You know, when the mayor calls for a meeting of her department heads, she has to rent a theater because there's so many of them. You know, and the COVID has provided an opportunity where our staff, people are working from homes, and we need to look for ways where there's duplication of effort and how we can use technology to streamline processes so that people can get things done for themselves. You know, we need to look at our agencies. When I lost money under the COVID, I didn't pass it on to my customers. I had to tighten my belt. I had to look at where I can cut spending. And that's what we need to do first before we think about any sort of other revenue generating actions that would hurt our people.
To stay on the discussion of the budget, well, let's now talk about taxation. Do you support raising the income tax on DC's highest earners? And what, if any, other tax or fees should the city consider raising? You have 30 seconds, starting with Maria Pickering.
Well, no, I don't support raising income taxes during this time. In fact, one of the things that I'm proposing is that we allow our seniors who are federal and city retirees to keep more of their pension income. And I think I'm the only candidate who is proposing passing the legislation for a pension exclusion that has been in front of the city council for at least 3 years. I think we need to tighten our belts. I think there are plenty of opportunities to exercise prudent fiscal management across city agencies. So I would be against a tax on the highest earners. These people can move if they don't like the taxes here. That's not a very good solution. Thank you.
Thank you. Alexandra Padro, you earlier raised concerns about raising income taxes. Does that apply to the highest earners? And are there any other revenue measures that you would want to take? Sorry, this question was for Alexandra Padro.
Yes. So, as I said, this is the wrong time to be raising taxes on anyone, even the highest earner. You raise taxes when you're in good financial times, not in challenging ones. And in fact, I think that the most important thing that we can do regarding taxes is to look at creating a retail property tax cap that reduces the amount of property taxes paid by retailers that are only able to use 30 or 50% of the square footage that they're leasing right now, so that later we will be able to get 100%
Thank
of
you.
their
That's time.
property taxes and sales taxes instead of zero.
Thank you. That's time. Councilmember Robert White, you were among the lawmakers who voted to increase income taxes on the highest earners. Do you stand by that? And are there other areas where you think the city can raise revenue?
The specific amendment was to raise taxes on individuals who make $250,000 or more a year, and the tax increase would have amounted to only a few $100s a year. And so, yes, I do stand by that. We live in a community, and when you live in a community and you hit really hard, unforeseeable, unprecedented times, those of us who are doing better have to step up to help those who are doing worse, especially when asking for more help really only amounts to a few $100s a year. So yes, we have to make sure that the folks at the lower end of the income scale whose jobs have been lost because of this pandemic can make it through to the other end.
Thank you. Ann Wilcox?
Yes, I support that proposal as well, to raise the income tax on the highest earners. This idea that people are going to move out of DC is a red herring. It really doesn't pan out. And as others have said, they can afford it. There's another area we haven't talked about, which is called reversing the Trump tax cuts. Those were personal income tax cuts that were given to sort of mirror the federal tax cuts. Those could be reversed so that local taxpayers would only pay what they were paying previously. That could raise up to $500 million. So that's also a great revenue enhancement in addition to the cuts that we've talked about.
Mr. Jai Raman, where do you stand on taxation?
You know, when we raise taxes, I've never seen it go back down. So it's going to become permanent. Again, to continue my point of what I was making, we need to look at our agencies and say in the COVID, where can we find efficiencies? Because our agencies right now work at silos. I have a neighbor who went to get a simple license, and he had to go to 4 different locations and spend 4 hours of his day to get the simplest thing done, and he still didn't get it done because our agencies work in silos. They need to cooperate. And if we do need to look at raising revenues, we need to look at people who come into the city and every day benefit from it, but don't pay their fair share. So that's where we need to look at revenues, revenue generation.
Thank you. I'll turn back to Robert White for a 15-second rebuttal. Can you respond to the concerns raised that higher taxes would end up being permanent and would potentially lead to the city losing more residents?
I think it's prudent for us to revisit our tax revision commission whose work now is over a decade old. The finances of the city have changed dramatically since then. So it needs to be a balance. We do need to understand where we are moving in terms of the tax needs of our city to make sure that they are balanced. But we should understand that right now, individuals making more than $250,000 a year pay the same tax rate as those who are struggling.
15-second rebuttal for Alexandra Padro. What's your response to the contention that the wealthy should be paying the same rate as the lowest income earners in the district?
I do believe that at some point it would be appropriate to look at making changes to our tax structure, and I would also endorse reconvening a task force or a commission to analyze comparable taxation rates in other jurisdictions to make sure that we're keeping pace.
All right. We'll now move on to a lightning round where I will ask candidates to raise their hands if they support a specific policy proposal before the DC Council. At my discretion, I will ask for candidates to expand on their positions and debate depending on the divisions that we see. To start off, raise your hand if you support further cuts to the DC police budget. All right, so we have Robert White and Ann Wilcox indicating they support further cuts. Ann Wilcox, where would you like to see the DC police budget cut?
Yes, I think we need to make further cuts in staffing and deploy some of those resources to mental health counselors and other violence interrupters who can respond to calls in more appropriate ways than what is happening now. Some of the cuts have been good. We didn't need the horse unit, the equestrian unit, but further cuts could certainly be made.
Alexander Padro, you have been a vocal advocate for increased policing in the Shaw area. What's your concern about further cuts to the police department?
While I don't have any objection to moving dollars around so that functions that are needed when you don't necessarily need an armed officer to deal with with traffic accidents and the like. If there's an opportunity to use social workers and others to address other first responder needs, that's fine. But the reality is that in circumstances where additional police resources are needed in order to address emergent crime problems like we had in Shaw last summer, we wouldn't have had a summer fall crime initiative if we didn't need to move officers around. So I would
Thank
oppose
you.
reducing the total number of officers.
Thank you. That's time. Councilmember White, what's your response to the concerns that cutting the police budget would undermine public safety efforts?
Well, it certainly wouldn't, and I think Alexandra Padro was getting to this. There are many functions of the police duties that don't belong there. Why do armed city employees have exclusive jurisdiction when a car makes a right turn on red? That's not a public safety issue. Somebody is experiencing a mental health crisis. It's not the police we need. It's a mental health professional. And that list really starts to get long. So we have to reduce MPD's budget so that we can appropriately fund other existing agencies or agencies that we need to create that are more appropriate to handling these types of issues. But I should also note, our only response to crime for
Thank you. That's
decades has been
time.
to increase the police budget, and it hasn't worked.
Thank you. That's been time. Chandra Jayaraman, can you respond to Councilmember White's contention that increasing the police budget time and time again hasn't always made a meaningful difference in fighting crime in the district?
Yeah, I think we call on our officers to do way too much. And that's what the town hall at convene showed. And so we need to look at what are their core functions of the police that we ask them to do. And then take those things that don't belong to them and give it to the agencies that appropriately belongs to. Then we can look at a budget and say, what kind of budget do we need to carry out those core functions? And any remaining savings should go to those other areas. But we need to start with looking at what are we asking our police to do, which is way too much.
Maria Pickering, all your rivals today suggested that police are asked to do too much. Do you agree with their assessment?
I think our Metropolitan Police Department is unique because of our position as a constitutionally mandated federal district. So in addition to the community policing function that is typical for a big city police department, our police department also has to interact with many other law enforcement agencies that have jurisdiction in Washington, D.C. For example, the Capitol Hill Police, the Uniformed Secret Service, the park police, and so forth and so on. So they're in a unique situation and they do a fantastic job. I've had the opportunity to tour their training facility in Blue Plains, and I can tell you that their scenario-based training is the best in the country. We have the best police force, and they deserve our full support and full funding. Thank you.
By a show of hands, raise your hand if you support the decriminalization of sex work in the District of Columbia. Right. Alexander Padra, why do you oppose the decriminalization of sex work?
So I'm actually an advocate for the legalization, not the decriminalization of sex work. Back in the 19th century, we had legal sex work in the district. So if we are to license it and to regulate it and to tax it, then absolutely, I'm supportive of that. I'm concerned that if we just decriminalize it without putting other controls in place, we risk contributing to an increase in human trafficking and child abuse.
Chandra Jayaraman, what do you think about either decriminalizing or legalizing?
I think we need to first look at why they're doing that. They have no other options, and so we need to actually provide an opportunity for people to choose a different pathway than prostitution. And I don't think somebody should go to jail because they have found no other means of earning an income than that. So, but I'm really concerned about what the door that it opens to sex trafficking of young boys and young girls. And that should take first precedence before we just open the floodgates and say, well, then let's see what happens and then decide. We need to first offer the help that we can so they can choose a better pathway.
Robert White, what's your rebuttal to the concerns raised about human trafficking?
Well, the points that Chandra Jayaraman raised are absolutely valid points. They're the reason that I come out on the other side of this. Many people who participate in sex work are victims. And so criminalizing, arresting them does not help them. In fact, it hurts them, and it's very unfair. There are also many people, especially trans women of color, who engage in survival sex work because there is job discrimination. These folks have been put out of their homes, and this is the way that they eat. It's the way that they survive. And so criminalizing this is not something that helps the situation, but we do have an opportunity to give more resources to people who have been pushed aside by society, and that's what we have to do.
Thank you, that's time. By a show of hands, raise your hand if you support ranked choice voting in the District of Columbia. Right, Ann Wilcox, explain your support.
Yes, thank you. Ranked choice voting is actually a core issue of the National Green Party, and we support it locally as well. It has worked in states like Maine and other progressive jurisdictions, even some local areas. I think Tacoma Park uses it as well. The important point is that you're able to rank your choices so that your preferred choice, who may not be the most popular candidate, is your first choice. Then others are ranked so that the final winner is someone that has a broad base of support, and it should definitely be tried in the District of Columbia.
Maria Pickering, why do you oppose ranked choice voting?
I don't think it's a good idea. It takes away from the voice of the people, the voters who vote for candidates of their choice.
And Wilcox, a rebuttal?
Right. Well, it actually gives people more choice because it allows you to vote for someone you actually prefer who may not be considered more electable, quote unquote. And then as those votes are sort of discarded, the final winner is someone who has broad support in the community. So it actually allows people's votes to mean more in the end.
Maria Pickering, you can have one more 15-second rebuttal.
With all due respect, I disagree.
All right, we will now turn to a video question from the community. Let's hear from Sakuna Lee Gray.
The coronavirus pandemic and Black Lives Matter movement have brought to the forefront issues of systemic racial inequalities in DC. We know that around 80% of the COVID-19 related deaths in DC have been Black residents, who only make up only 46% of the population. What do you see as some of the underlying factors contributing to these disparities, and what would you do to tackle them?
Maria Pickering, you have the first answer.
Well, that's a very interesting question. You know, some years ago when I was younger, I used to work as a cocktail waitress here in Washington, and every table in every restaurant and bar used to have an ashtray on it. And since the mayor started putting out her statistics on populations who have been succumbed to COVID, I've noticed that a lot of it has been older men in the 60, 70, and up age range. And these were people who smoked. Back then it was trendy. It was
Thank
the
you.
cool
That's
thing to
time.
do to smoke. So this is I think what
Thank
is
you.
some of the causative
Chandra
factor.
Jayaraman, can you identify factors that have contributed to racial disparities and health outcomes with COVID and how you would tackle them?
Absolutely. You know, I think the two words, economic opportunities. When you don't have economic opportunities, like so many people have been left behind, you know, you don't have the income to buy healthy foods and vegetables. And you also don't, you know, couple that with a lack of clinics that provide preventative care and assessments of your underlying conditions. This is what you have. So I think we need to bring back you know, more grocery stores into areas where they're needed. We also need to have community-based clinics so people can get tested for their underlying conditions and get treatment. That's how you reduce the number of victims of the COVID-19 crisis in our Black and Brown communities.
Robert White, I'm going to tweak the question slightly for you as an incumbent. What have you been doing to tackle racial disparities in healthcare?
Well, we've been doing a lot. The racial disparities that we're seeing play out in COVID are not news to us. We just haven't been addressing them aggressively enough. George Mason just 2 years ago released a very detailed study on health disparities in our region and in DC specifically. So what I have done is I've addressed the issue of maternal mortality with a bill I introduced about a year and a half ago. I have worked aggressively to expand access to healthy foods in our food deserts, both with incentives to grocery stores, but also supports to neighborhood markets and making it easier for people to buy more fruits and vegetables. I've been aggressive on the issue of lead, which is a significant health effect on communities of color in DC, including a hearing I held on this issue just today. So I've been very active on this issue long before coronavirus.
Thank you. Ann Wilcox, what do you see as factors leading to health disparities, and how would you tackle
Right.
them?
Right. I mean, historically, communities of color in our country have not had access to good health care. There are concerns, doctors don't listen to people oftentimes. They don't have access to prenatal care or through care throughout their lifetime. And racism itself is a pre-existing condition. In other words, contributing to high blood pressure and other sorts of conditions. So obviously there's a disadvantage there. In terms of what we should do now, I think a hospital east of the river is critical, whether it's, you know, in St. Elizabeth's. It needs to have full maternal wards and also trauma care in that area. So we need to
Thank you.
expand the facilities. Thank you.
Next up, Alexander Padro.
Specifically with COVID, because so many of our essential workers are people of color, they're disproportionately exposed to the virus and are succumbing at rates higher than the general population. We need to ensure that all employers are providing opportunities for employees to work safely, have the proper personal protective equipment and workplace practices that would allow them to continue to earn a living in their current work without excessive exposure.
Thank you. We're going to move on to our next question. Mayor Bowser has repeatedly said that the district government does not have the resources to meet the needs of everyone suffering financially because of the coronavirus pandemic. With that in mind, who should be the district's top priority for financial pandemic relief? Maria Pickering?
Well, as I've said before, we seem to have the resources to give handouts to candidates looking for public office. Why is this money not being used to take care of the homeless people on the north side of DuPont Circle or in the overpass on L Street behind the train station? Those should be our first priorities, is to take care of the most vulnerable among us. And what we've seen from this crowd that can't manage straight and has been in power for over half a century is they don't care for the people who are the most vulnerable. They don't walk the walk. Thank you.
Alexander Padro, who should be the top priority for coronavirus financial relief?
Our initial priority needs to be the small businesses that are going to be extinct if they don't receive immediately the level of relief that's necessary to help them to survive. We're projecting somewhere between 50 and 70% of all businesses in the district may not be in operation in a year. That's a huge number of jobs. It's a huge impact on our sales tax base as well as our commercial property tax base. So if we don't staunch the loss of those small businesses, we're going to be in a world of hurt.
Thank you. That's time. Robert White, what's your answer?
We do absolutely have to step up to protect our small businesses. Massive closure of our local small businesses will have a devastating and very destabilizing impact on our city, and that means that our workers will not be able to return to work. But we are also going to have to step up in a big way for those individuals and families facing eviction, because massive eviction across our city would also destabilize our economy significantly. That's going to require us to continue to lean on the federal government and work with our regional officials to make sure DC gets the $700 million that we were shorted in the Federal CARES Act.
And Wilcox, do you agree that small businesses should be among the first in line for financial pandemic relief? And if not, what else? Which other groups?
Well, I don't think they should be first in line. I think first in line should be tenants who will face mass evictions over the next few months. This could happen as early as January or February. Obviously, they need to balance, unemployment they've been getting or jobs and so forth. But we need to proactively help people have payment plans and rental assistance where needed. And obviously, small businesses are important as well.
Tundra Jayaraman, you're the last one to answer this question. What do you make of your opponent's answers, and who do you think should be first in line for pandemic relief?
I think it's all really interconnected. Without supporting small businesses who have the jobs, we're going to have more people who are employed. So I think I don't like the idea of picking winners and losers. Of course, we need to take care of the most vulnerable residents first, but then what? We need to support our small businesses. One way to do that is to take the bid taxes that they currently pay throughout the COVID-19 taxes, put it together, and give them out to grants to the small businesses that really desperately need them right now.
We'll go to another community question. Do you support the legalization of recreational marijuana dispensaries in the city? And if so, do you support the legislation and regulations proposed by Mayor Bowser? Starting off with Councilmember White.
I do think that the District of Columbia needs to move to a legalization and establishment for recreational marijuana. It is where the country is moving, but it's very important that we be able to tax and regulate it. That is what Congress has gotten in the way of. That is a decision that should lie 100% with our residents and our local officials, but right now Congress is in the way.
Chandra Jayaraman, do you support the legalization of dispensaries, and does Mayor Bowser have the right approach for legalizing them if you do?
I think Councilmember Robert White's right. It is a personal choice, and it's a decision that the voters made, and we should carry that out. Voters have decided to decriminalize it, and we should legalize it, and we should use it as an opportunity to generate the much-needed tax revenue for the city. But also, we need to take a common sense approach and say, look, it's not okay to have smoke in front of schools and around
Thank
school
you.
areas where our kids are.
And Wilcox, where do you stand on this issue?
Definitely our party supports it, and I personally think it should be a choice whether for medicinal purposes or recreational. Congress is the big hang up because they won't allow us to tax or regulate like Colorado can, for example. And I also support the initiative which is calling for legalization of certain like mushrooms and things that are helpful for people who have certain physical conditions. So Initiative 81, I believe it's called. So.
Next up, Maria Pickering.
Well, why would we want to encourage our citizens to put potentially dangerous drugs into their bodies? I know these things are individual choices, but we ought to be encouraging people to eat healthy meals and have healthy lifestyles instead of gateway drugs that could lead to worse things.
Alexandra Padra.
Legalization has produced a huge financial windfall for the states has been able to move forward with it. We're not going to be able probably to do it until we are a state, but the entire community and our entire economy would dramatically benefit from this. From the newspapers where the dispensaries would advertise, to entrepreneurs who would be creating products, and reselling products based on cannabis.
Robert White, a 15-second rebuttal to Maria Pickering's contention that encouraging the legalization of marijuana encourages unhealthy behavior.
Well, I love a good whiskey and a good glass of red wine, and we could make the same argument about that. But for historical reasons, we're not. So, I think we get into a very slippery slope, and it becomes quickly hypocritical with that argument. So, I respectfully disagree.
Maria Pickering, a 15-second rebuttal.
Well, I think as my opponent said, it's a slippery slope, and we ought not encourage people to go down that path. Let's encourage more healthy behaviors.
And Chandra Jairam, you also raised the issue of the potential financial benefits for the city. How do you balance that? How do you balance that with the medical and health concerns? 15 seconds.
Again, I think it's a personal choice issue, and we need to respect the will of the voters. And they chose to decriminalize this. I think it's no more dangerous. Tobacco is far more dangerous than marijuana is in terms of quantity and when you smoke it. So I don't believe it is an evil comparison.
We're going to move to another lightning round where I'm going to ask all candidates to limit their answers to one number or one word. We'll start with this. Rate the performance of Council Chairman Phil Mendelson on a scale of 1 to 10. Mr. Jayaraman.
What's 1? What's 10?
1 is the lowest, 10 is the highest. All right,
8.
That's an 8. Alexander Bodro, how would you rate Phil Mendelson's leadership of the council?
I would give him a 7.
Maria Pickering.
5.
Robert White.
5.
I'll work with the chairman. I'll give him an 8. I'll give him some room for improvement.
Anna Wilcox.
7. Like Dancing with the Stars, a 7.
All right. Now let's rate the performance of Mayor Muriel E. Bowser on a scale of 1 to 10. Chandra Jayaraman.
7.
Alexander Padra.
6.
Maria Pickering.
3.
Robert White,
6.
Ann Wilcox.
6.
Great. Maria Pickering, can you expand on why you give Mendelson and Bowser the lowest marks of this batch?
Well, look at the state of our city. All right, how many times have I said this? We have homeless people sleeping in the street in the midst of a public health emergency. We have abysmally underperforming public schools. We have an Office of Contracting and Procurement in desperate need of oversight. And a couple of my worthy opponents have mentioned the McMillan Project. There are other land grabs and sweetheart deals that citizens all over town are unhappy about. The Hill East Project is one. The Howard University Divinity School property in Ward 5 is another property that the citizens are very concerned about because of these kinds of issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Chandra Jayaraman, you gave some of the highest marks to both elected officials. Can you respond to Maria's concerns?
Sure. I think I'm really thinking about this in the short term, how the mayor has used public health data to make sure our rates of COVID-19 transmission are low. And I think this has been a very, very difficult way, time period to balance the budget while not limiting the amount of services to be cut. She actually increased the school funding. So all those things she should get credit for. As I've said also, that there's always room for improvement, but I think over the past year, I think she's done an admirable job of bringing us through the current crisis.
Robert White, why do you give the mayor a 6?
The mayor is strong in many aspects of administration, but I think that too often is tripped up by politics. I think politics plays too much of a role in the way that the mayor operates, and it really gets in the way of productivity in the city and partnerships that unfortunately have been pushed on the back burner because of politics. I also think that there's an over-reliance on slogans as opposed to real results and really digging into the issues that we face. It's not a bad thing to admit that students of color are not doing well enough in our public schools, but we can't fix things that we won't admit are a problem. So I'd like to work more with the mayor, but that's been a challenge.
Thank you. We'll move to the next question. Each voter can select 2 candidates for 2 at-large seats. Besides yourself, who gets your second vote? Chandra Jayaraman.
Oh, wow. Okay. I would say I would go with Councilmember Robert White, and I've said that before because I think he's done a great job so far. I think he's a reasonable person that I would love to be sitting next to and work with. I think we can get a lot of things done together for the betterment of the people of the District of Columbia.
All right. Alexander Padro, who gets your second vote?
I'm a big believer in the secrecy of the ballot, so I'm not telling.
Maria Pickering, who gets your second vote?
Well, I'm with Mr. Padro on this one. I'm keeping the secrecy of the ballot. I'd just like to say that most of my opponents are Democrats thinly disguised as independents. So you can draw your own conclusions there. Thank you.
Robert White, who gets your second vote?
Oh, I'm hoping to get residents' first vote, and I got to tell you, I have a great deal of respect for this field of candidates. But I will be, hopefully, if I win re-election, working with somebody, and I don't want to step off on a bad foot because we get more done if we work together.
Ann Wilcox, what about you? Who gets your second vote?
Yes, and actually I said this in a forum last night. I think progressives should rally around Ed Lazier. I think Ed is the most electable. He's already got a lot of endorsements. And we do have a great field of some really qualified candidates, but I hope folks will support Ed. And I, with all respect to the council member and others that are here.
All right, we'll move on to our next question about policing. The DC Council recently passed emergency police reform legislation that, among other things, requires prompt disclosure of body camera footage from deadly force incidents and sets standards for use of deadly force. The Council is revisiting this legislation now as it considers a permanent version of this bill. What provisions do you think should be added or taken out? We'll start with Councilmember White.
Well, I want to give a strong hat tip to my colleague Charles Allen, who led the effort on this bill. I also want to note that I wrote some of the provisions in this bill where I think we can strengthen it. I think the bill as it is strong and has helped the city already because releasing body camera footage gives a level of trust to residents even as an investigation is underway. But we do have to look at pulling away some of the non-public safety aspects of policing, and that's something that I hope we can dig further into in the permanent legislation.
Thank you. Maria Pickering?
Well, increased transparency is always a good thing. So releasing the camera footage can be useful. However, people ought not to jump to conclusions um, based on snippets of videos or misinformation. As someone who sat on jury duty, I know that sometimes there's a lot more to the story than just a short video or one person's perspective. So we need to be careful about that and try to help our police.
Chandrajai Raman, do you think there should be any changes to the emergency police legislation?
Well, let me address body worn cameras. I think those should be viewed first by the family. And I think the family should have a say about whether they should be released or not, because most of these types of incidents that get released are really tragic incidents. So I would want to give some deference to the families and have them decide whether to release the public or not. But in general, I think transparency is important, and I think that's what's being called for here. And being more transparent builds trust amongst our community, and that's a fundamental thing we need to try and achieve.
Alexandra Padro.
I think looking at reassigning you know, types of first responder tasks that do not require an armed officer should be a priority. We need to begin making headway on reassigning some of those responsibilities so that there are fewer incidents where armed officers are unfortunately called upon to use excessive force.
Finally, Ann Wilcox.
Yes, I think the body worn camera law was essential because the mayor was basically sitting on release of this video for years after some of these killings, like Terrence Sterling and some of the other police involved killings. So that provision was necessary. Obviously, as Maria says, video can be taken out of context, it can be misused in grand juries and all kinds of things, but it's something. Greater transparency is needed. And I also think that the ban on police use of pepper spray and rubber bullets and those kinds of things is also necessary, given our strong First Amendment
Thank you.
approach in DC.
Thank you. That's time. We're going to move to another community question. Did you support the district's use of public financing to build Nationals Park? And would you support similar public funding to bring the Washington football team to DC? We'll start with Alex Padra.
I initially didn't support public financing for the stadium. I thought that the made to pay the full bill. But remarkably, it turned out to be an incredible investment. The payback in terms of sales taxes, especially, have been dramatic. I would consider providing subsidies for infrastructure for a new football stadium, but the owners need to pay for the building.
Thank you. Chandra Jairaman. Sorry, we had technical problems. We'll move to Maria Pickering.
Well, we love our
Back.
sports teams. We love the Nats, and obviously the Nats Stadium has turned out to be a great investment and helped revitalize the waterfront there in the Navy Yard neighborhood. As for the football team, I think we really need to study whether the team itself ought to put up money for a stadium in town. But based on the Nats experience, it looks as though the neighborhood got a great return on investment. It's turned around, it's attracted a lot of businesses, so it's turned out to be a positive thing. Thank you.
We'll go back to Mr. J. Rahman. Do you support public funding to bring back the Washington football team?
I would support bringing back the football team, but I don't think we can afford to pay for public financing of the team. Not when Mr. Schneider is a billionaire. I think if we were going to put it someplace, it wouldn't be at RFK. I think we should put it somewhere over by Nats Park and Audi Field and take advantage of the parking that's there, so we don't have large swaths of land that are unusable for most of the year. So I'm not for public financing of a football stadium, but would welcome them back.
Robert White, did you support the use of public funding for Nationals Park, and would you support the same for the Washington football team?
Nationals Park happened long before my time in government, but I think it has shown to be an incredible investment for the entire city. Public funding, though, to bring the Washington football team back is a hard no. One, I don't think that the city has the land for a professional football stadium where you only play 8 home games a year. It's not going to be a boon to our economy. We see in Prince George's County that it has not done a lot for the area where it is now. But also, I think Dan Snyder has not shown great respect for the fans, for the franchise, and what's happened over the past 20 years is really sad to see as somebody who grew up as a great fan of the Washington football team.
Alexander Padro, can you have a 15-second rebuttal to the concerns raised by Robert White about public funding?
The reality is that the huge amount of commercial property taxes and development that result from the Nat Stadium really would result in our needing to take a very close look at the opportunity. But again, I think that providing funding for infrastructure rather than for construction of the stadium, is what we.
Robert White, a 15-second rebuttal.
It is just hard for me to imagine a way where any public investment in a football stadium would be our highest priority. Sometimes we do make investments, so tax increment financing, we put money in, and the city gets a lot of money out of it. We recoup that investment, but I don't see us being able to recoup an investment in a football stadium.
Ann Wilcox, what's your stance on this discussion?
Yes, thank you. Well, the State Green Party and my usual allies definitely oppose the building of National Park, but I enjoy going there. So and so forth. And also the Capitol Center downtown, or Verizon Center, is also very accessible. But I think there are better uses for the Hill East neighborhood. I don't think we should try to develop that as a new stadium, which is only used, out of a short season of the year. So I think we need to move on from that and not kowtow to the developers who might be suggesting that.
Robert White wanted to weigh into this discussion again.
Oh, I missed some of Ann's point, but no, I think my point has been clear.
All right, we're going to move on to a question about education. What should be the standard for reopening schools? Chandrajai Raman.
Thank you so much. I think the standard for reopening schools is to provide parents with an option of both in-person learning as well as distance learning, because based on the health conditions in their family. I've been in the field of emergency preparedness for 18 years, so I have a good idea of what reopening our schools should look like. It's to prevent the COVID from getting in and making sure our HVAC systems are up to date to keep the airflow moving, and have a concrete plan for what we do when there is a case that occurs. So if we can take these steps, I think we should provide the options that parents desperately need, especially for our youngest children who would benefit the most from in-person learning.
Thank you. Alexander Padro, what should be the standard for sending kids back to class?
Initially my reaction is that we shouldn't be looking at in-class instruction again until there's a vaccine that's been widely disseminated. But I could see that schools that have proper ventilation and teachers that do not have pre-existing conditions and families that do not have members that would be unduly, risking transmission, of the virus by having their youngest members in the classroom, could potentially, see some, allowance for in-person instruction
Thank you.
before.
Maria Pickering, what do you see as the standard for bringing kids back to class?
Well, I think the standard should be some applied common sense. Children are not an at-risk population when it comes to getting COVID. It's usually older people with pre-existing conditions. And so if we take proper precautions, there should be no reason why we shouldn't be opening up our schools. It's very important, particularly for younger children and for children from low-income households, to have adequate in-person instruction. We've talked about the fact that even in good times, our school system is woefully underperforming. And I'm really afraid and concerned that many of our children who could benefit most from an education are going to fall behind if we don't reopen our schools soon. Thank you.
Mr. J. Rahman, you requested a 15-second rebuttal.
Yeah, I think there is an opportunity here. I've been doing this with childcare centers, and I know there's some schools that are already open and operating. That's why we really need to give the choice to parents to make that decision, whether there are underlying conditions within their own family that makes them uncomfortable. But there's a lot of families who realize that they can't work and care for their children in the way they need to. So we need to provide that option for parents.
Thank you. Let's bring Robert White into this discussion. What do you believe should be the standard for bringing kids back into DC public schools?
The standard should be set by our public health professionals. The unfortunate part is that we have not been able, as parents, as council members, we've not been able to get a plan to analyze. This is going to be an incredibly difficult choice for parents who are going to have to weigh the benefits of in-person learning against the potential harms, because it's not a question of whether there will be COVID in the schools. It's a question of how much and how badly people will be affected. I've led the charge on the council to get the administration to tell us something. We don't know what modifications are going to be made to HVAC, whether PPE is going to be provided, if
Thank
there are
you.
going to be desks are going to be spaced, and we need that.
Ann Wilcox, where do you stand on the issue of reopening schools?
Right. Well, we obviously have to listen to the professionals, but there are certain groups that are really suffering. Special ed students, I think in particular, their families are really struggling not only to care for the children, but to teach them. So those groups should come back. Also, younger children, maybe in smaller groups, as someone said. But there's also the issue of teachers. We have a lot of teachers who are middle-aged, who may have underlying conditions. So their health needs to be taken into account. So it has to be a gradual process, maybe with half portions
Thank you.
as we start.
We'll move to another community question. Mayor Bowser this week introduced legislation to reform the Certified Business Enterprise Program, which is meant to help local companies by giving them preferences in contracting. However, critics say that this program has been abused by out-of-state companies and fraudulent companies. Do you believe the program is working as intended, and do you support the mayor's legislation? Starting with Maria Pickering.
Well, no, we've had abuses of this kind of legislation. There has been guidance and legislation, I believe, on the books encouraging our contractors to have a certain percentage of their subcontracts with local companies, and that blatantly has not happened. There are a lot of illegal practices going on, and our Office of Contracting and Procurement needs to really look seriously at its practices and its processes to make sure that our small business communities are included in contracting opportunities. Thank you.
Wilcox, do you support the legislation the mayor proposed to reform the CBE program?
Well, I'm not familiar with all of the nuts and bolts, to be honest, but I think there needs to be much more enforcement to hire local and to enforce those rules. I mean, you go to projects like the 11th Street Bridge project on the river, and there was no enforcement of local hiring, and or there's an excuse to get rid of local workers, once there's some issue. So we need to reform that, and we definitely need to provide a pipeline for jobs for local young people, particularly.
Robert White, you've made CBE programs one of your focuses as a council member. How do you think the program is working, and what do you think of the mayor's proposed legislation?
The program is not working very well. The mayor's proposed legislation was interesting. She proposed it during a hearing on my bill, which did exactly what her proposal suggested, except mine went further. So she's proposing that we close loopholes that allow large out-of-state companies to take advantage of our CBE programs. My legislation does that already. She proposed increasing the payment time to our local small businesses. My legislation does that already, except it went further than hers. But there's one critical thing she was missing, which is that waivers for CBE contracting are approved by the mayor. My bill requires council approval, so we don't see so many small
Thank,
businesses skipped over by government agencies. And so I hope that she will go a little
thank you.
further and
That's
actually support my bill.
Mr. J. Rahman.
Yeah, I think it needs to be reformed. I am a CBE, and I've struggled in getting contracts, primarily because the packages of how they write the RFPs for it are geared towards larger businesses. I think there's also a practice of where companies put their addresses in the district and claim that they're a CBE. That's not true. I think we need to have a higher standard that requires even subcontractors to have DC employees in order to qualify for CBE. That's the only way we make sure that district residents that would benefit from any CBE project are getting the
Thank
contract and district residents are working on a project.
Alexander Padro, do you believe the CBE program is working, and do you support the mayor's legislation to reform it?
When the CBE program is working, it's great. A significant number of district employees able to be employed, but it has a spotty history. The rollout was probably one of the worst that I've seen for a program of this anywhere in the country. We've made progress, but we're still a long way. So yes, CBE reform would definitely be greatly needed. And I would support it. I'm ready to say that everything in the mayor's bill is where it should be, but I think it bears discussion.
Mr. Jai Rahman, did you want to give a 15-second rebuttal?
Well, it's a similar rebuttal, which is that I think we need the Department of Small and Local Business Development to provide more direct assistance. They hold these fairs, but then nothing comes of it because all they do is pass out papers, but you never actually get to a point where you talk to somebody and say, hey, here's what we need, and here's the services we provide. How can we get a contract so we can, as a district resident, I can get the contract
That's time.
and spend it locally.
Thank you, that's time. Ann Wilcox, you wanted to enter the discussion?
No, I think I think the emphasis should be on hiring local workers and helping them be successful in these projects, particularly providing pipelines for youth. Thank you.
I'll give the final word to Robert White, who has been introducing his own legislation on this topic.
So, again, we have to strengthen the CBE program. We also have to reduce the number of waivers. The Office of Contracting and Procurement, there are a number of things they do well, but the CBE program is a place that has a lot of gaps, and that's going to require work from Office of Contracting and Procurement and our small business agencies.
Thank you. We're going to move to another lightning round where I'm going to ask candidates to raise their hand to show support for proposals before the DC Council. Raise your hand if you would support a first-in-the-nation proposal to require a doctor's prescription to purchase e-cigarettes as a smoking cessation device. Again, this proposal would require you to have a doctor's prescription in order to buy e-cigarettes. Raise your hand if you support it. All right, there's no support for that proposal. Raise your hand if you would support congestion pricing to reduce traffic and to encourage the use of alternatives to cars in downtown DC. All right, we have all but Maria Pickering expressing support. Maria Pickering, can you explain why you oppose congestion pricing?
Well, I'm not sure that that's a good idea in the long run. I think what we may need to do is study our traffic patterns and see how we can encourage people to use other modes of transportation. But a lot of people are going to continue to come into town on cars and hopefully on metro and buses once things open up again. But I'm not sure that that's a really good idea.
Thank you. Alexandra Padro, where do you stand on why do you support congestion pricing as a tool?
I would be supportive of congestion pricing for non-DC registered vehicles. We need a way to be able to capture revenue from, the thousands of employees that come into the district every day, but we're unable to tax their incomes. So this is a great opportunity for us to do that. I don't support its application to district registered vehicles because that would potentially be a significant burden.
Thank you. Councilmember White, should congestion pricing apply to DC residents and non-residents alike?
It should not. If we could separate by income, then maybe that would be a good idea. But we can't. This has to be a way that we raise revenue from out of state people who we can't tax, but who use city services significantly. So it really is just a matter of fairness. But as our city grows, as our region grows, we have to find a way to incentivize people out of their cars and into public transportation.
Thank you. Now, candidates, raise your hand if you would support imposing a tax on sugary beverages. All right, we have Alexander Padro as the only candidate supporting a soda tax. Can you expand on why?
I believe that the negative health impacts on all of our residents, would certainly, mean that having people think twice about, making those kinds of choices, would have a basic positive impact on public health throughout the city. And a couple of cents we're talking about many instances is not going to be a deterrent to those that insist. The funds that are generated could obviously be put into expanding health
Thank you.
services.
Thunder Dry Ramen, what do you make of Alexander Padro's argument, the public health case for a soda tax?
I really don't think taxing people is going to change their behaviors. You know, it may modify what they buy, but it's not going to change their behavior. And so I think that's the wrong approach. I really think in some of our lowest communities who use SNAP benefits to purchase soda, I think it's still gonna happen. And so we're essentially having the city government use SNAP benefits to pay itself the tax. And I don't think that's the right approach. I think we need to take a more public health approach, which does educate people and provides opportunities for them to buy more healthier drinks that's available to
Thank
them.
you.
And currently it's not.
And Wilcox, what do you make of the arguments you just heard?
Right. Well, I agree that we need to encourage healthier eating options, try to eliminate food deserts so people have those products available to them. And, charging an extra penny or two for a soda isn't going to stop a young person from buying that soda. So I don't think it's a progressive tax. And I don't think we should wade into those waters.
By a show of hands, raise your hands if you support Robert White's proposal to delay the extension of streetcar into Benning Road. All right, so we have all but Mark. Looks like we have all candidates in agreement that the streetcar extension should be delayed. With that, we'll move on to our next community question. Should we remove police from DC public schools? Should police be in DC public schools providing security? We'll start off with Maria Pickering.
Well, I think resource officers are useful in schools because they get to know the students, they get to know the teachers, and they can help diffuse situations before things become more serious. So I'm really not in favor of removing police from the public schools. I think perhaps we just need to have a good process and a good approach for using our resource officers to help our students and to help maintain order in schools.
Robert White, does the police department belong in public schools?
No, it doesn't. When I was not a stellar student, the things that got me suspended from school many times were caught by teachers, and that's why I got suspended. Some of the things I did, if there was an officer in my school, I would have had a criminal record. It would have changed the entire trajectory of my life. That's not helpful for our students. I do want to be careful to make sure I'm listening to teachers and other students, the people most impacted, but I don't think it's healthy to have such an easy introduction to our criminal justice system for childhood issues that can many times be resolved other ways.
And Wilcox, where do you stand on this issue?
Yes, I think MPD should be removed from DC public schools, and I believe the security contract has already been changed or will be soon. So you do need some basic security, but police should be in the community, and in fact, they should be interacting more positively with the youth in the community, as the shooting of Dion K showed. So, we need less security and more positive interaction between police and youth.
Chandra J. Raman, where do you stand on this issue?
Yeah, I think school should be a safe haven for all children, and it's a place of learning. So I'm not sure that armed officers are the right place to be in schools. However, I would say that if a principal or hears of a credible threat, I think the principal should have the authority to request police support at schools for a finite period of time. And that's a reasonable request to make to have officers when there is a credible threat and that there's fear that children are going to be harmed.
Councilmember White, a 15-second rebuttal to the idea of having police available on request.
I do recognize, I'm not naive. There are incidents where students have weapons in school sometimes, and so everything requires us to use our common sense. It requires a reasonable balance. But I think we're on the sturdiest ground if we're really listening to our teachers and students who are most directly impacted by this.
Alexander Padro, where do you stand on this issue?
So obviously we need security in our schools, but private contractors can serve that role, and then in conjunction with social workers and other professionals in the school, many incidents would be able to be dealt with armed police. It's important to remember that major mass shootings in schools haven't been prevented by armed officers on premises. So it's not a one-size-fits-all solution.
We will now move to a 15-second question. If elected to the council, what committee would you want to chair? We'll start with Chandra Jayaraman.
I would want to chair the Committee on Government Operations. I think that is the area that needs the greatest amount of reform, and I think that's where we need to go to improve how our residents get things done for themselves by streamlining our processes.
Alexander Padro, what committee do you want to chair?
Overwhelmingly, out of the many hundreds of DC residents that I've spoken with during the past couple of months, have identified affordable housing as the top issue of concern. So I would want to be on the committee.
And Wilcox?
Yes, I agree. The Housing and Economic Development Committee is the most important. We need to develop affordable housing. We also need to hold housing developers to the deals they've already made for affordable housing. I want to mention there's a new tract up where Fannie Mae was on Wisconsin Avenue, and much more affordable housing should have been required there in that development. So we have to stop giving payoffs to developers and require them to produce deeply affordable housing. So I think that's really where the central issue.
Maria Pickering, which committee do you want to chair?
Well, I'm torn between two, education and the committee that oversees contracting and procurement.
Robert White, you currently chair the committee that oversees contracting and procurement. Do you want to stay as the chair, or is there another committee that you want to lead?
I do chair the Committee on Contracts and Procurements, but I am incredibly active on the Education Committee, the Housing Committee, and the Workforce Development Committee. But with contracting and procurement, this has been an opportunity for me to really drive equity and government efficiency, and that's something that we've done a good job in, and that's something I'll keep doing as long as I chair this committee.
And with that, we have come to the end of our time, and tonight's debate must end. The question and answer portion has concluded, and we will now provide each candidate an opportunity to make a 1-minute closing statement. We'll start with Mr. J. Rahman.
Thank you so much. I'm Chandra J. Rahman. I want to ask for your vote on November 3rd or sooner if you've already gotten your ballot. 40 years ago, my parents moved us to this country for a better life. And 25 years ago, I came to DC and fell in love with the city. And I'm living the American dream. I'm a father, a husband, a small business operator, and a homeowner. And the pandemic has changed a lot of things, and I think we need somebody with the right expertise and the right experience, and that's me at the right time. I have 18 years of emergency planning experience, and I've worked with the ANCs. I've convened people. I have a track record of bringing people together to find common ground that really can lift our city up. That's the kind of hands-on practical experience that we need on the city council, and I'm the right person for the job. So ask for your vote again on November 3rd, or as soon as you get the ballot, which hopefully will be this week, since I've got mine yesterday. So thank you again for the opportunity to speak before you.
Thank you. Mr. Padra?
Every DC neighborhood, deserves all of the amenities that neighborhoods that have already experienced revitalization are enjoying. They deserve, better parks, better schools, better recreation facilities, more affordable housing, more market rate housing, more businesses in a wide variety of types. I've been able to generate $3.5 billion of investment, public and private, in the Shaw neighborhood. I know how to bring communities together to be able to create a vision for their neighborhood and to attract the public and private resources necessary to bring the kinds of transformations that our neighborhoods are desiring. Many neighborhoods have been made promises for decades and still aren't seeing the benefits of revitalization. So my goal is to help make all DC neighborhoods better and to help make every DC neighborhood's dreams come true. And I would love to be able to be on the council of the District of Columbia, work with communities to accomplish this.
Next up, Ms. Pickering.
Well, my campaign motto is no more business as usual. I think it's time to bring a true diversity of ideas and prudent management to the City Council. As a former small business owner, government contract specialist, and government employee, I am the best qualified candidate to effect positive change for all residents in DC. I'm also the only one who represents the party of freedom and opportunity, the party of Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass, and I respectfully ask for your vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. White?
I'm at-large council member Robert White. It's been an honor to serve as your at-large council member for these past 4 years. This is work that I take very seriously because I'm fighting for you and your families as much as I'm fighting for mine. That's the reason I love work in local government. In this past 4 years, I've developed a reputation for being very strong on policy, also for being accessible. I listen to residents. I go out and meet you. I didn't stop knocking on doors or holding meet and greets when I won my election 4 years ago. I've kept doing that and always looking for new ways to hear you more. That's what I want to continue to do. So I'm asking for your vote. I'm number 14 on the ballot, and I'm asking for your support. Robert White for at-large council.
Thank you. And the final statement of the evening will go to Ms. Wilcox.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Fennett, and thank you to all the candidates. I am Ann Wilcox. I'm the DC Statehood Green candidate for the at-large race. As I said, I am a lawyer with experience on the DC Commission for Women, as an elected school board member, and more recently as a statehood activist and active in professional activities through the DC Bar, through the National Lawyers Guild, and those sorts of organizations. I represent the Statehood Green Party, and we, of course, have a progressive agenda calling for more accountability for the schools to the community through a public school board, for more affordable housing and fewer giveaways to developers, also for health equity, building a new hospital, as I said in my remarks. So we would ask for your support for all of the Statehood Greens who we have on the ballot this year, because we will present that progressive vision, which is so needed in DC. We're not a too progressive jurisdiction. We can always use more policies which serve people and serve the dispossessed. So that's what we're about.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That concludes our debate and the last of our 3 debates on the DC at-large council races. To learn more about how to cast a vote in this election, visit dcboe.org. And remember to visit 2020dcdebates.com to watch this debate and the others in their entirety. Thank you to all of our candidates, community partners, and the Office of Campaign Finance for hosting tonight's debate. Have a good night.